Welcome back, welcome back. US Secretary of State Condi Rice has yet again been visiting leaders of both Israel and the Palestinian territories in a last-ditch effort to save the US-sponsored peace conference next month. And joining me to discuss what we can expect to happen is Palestinian Representative Hussam Zomlot. Welcome, Hussam. And from Washington, D.C., we welcome John Bolton, former US Ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome, John. Welcome to you both. Let's begin with you, Hussam. There was a report this week of a poll which showed that 57% of Palestinians think the upcoming peace conference will be a failure. Now, there have been some frustrating conferences and things in the past, but why do you think, I mean, America really seems to be getting behind this one. Why 57% think it'll be a failure?
Unfortunately, many Palestinians, while they're hearing about these initiatives, are living daily realities that are different than what they're hearing in the news. For instance, they have just woke up last week on the news that the Israeli cabinet has announced the confiscation of 10,000 dunams of the area of East Jerusalem, particularly in Abu Dis. The land grab is at pace. The Gaza Strip is under total siege and blockade. More than 1.5 million in the Gaza Strip are threatened to be collectively punished through the cutting of electricity, water, etc. There is a total state of chaos in the occupied territories, and the situation is unprecedented in terms of poverty levels, in terms of the blockade and closure, in terms of the people's inability to travel or to move freely. Their economic well-being has been at its lowest ever since we have been starting recording economic activities in the occupied territories, and therefore one expects the pulse of the Palestinian society to be a little bit skeptic at the time.
Right, at that particular point, let's turn to you, John. I mean, with that, if you were in a position where that was your position that we've just heard, you'd be 57% fearful that it would be a failure, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm with the 57%. I don't see any prospect that this can succeed. I'm not sure why Secretary Rice wanted to set it up in the first place. I mean, you need a general context in which there's some prospect for movement between the parties. And in the circumstances we have now, you have a weak, divided government in Israel, and you have a Palestinian Authority that's near total collapse. So I don't think even the most energetic diplomacy by the United States could change those aspects of reality. And that's why I'm afraid this conference won't simply be a failure in the sense nothing much will come of it, but it may actually result in setting back diplomacy in the region.
Setting it back. What do you think about that, Hussam?
We are not the strongest party in this conflict, as you are aware, David, and we are the one who is suffering all the time, and the suffering is unbearable. You have hundreds of thousands of people who literally cannot go to hospitals or schools. So we are the party who would always want to explore any opportunity, let alone an opportunity that is backed and sponsored by the United States, let alone an opportunity that, in the words of the Dr. Rice, that it is in the strategic interest of America now that the creation of a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state is in the strategic interest of America. And therefore, we don't sit and choose when our people are dying by the day, when the situation is getting more desperate.
I understand. Come back to you in one second. Let me just put that to John Bolton. Is it in the strategic interest of the United States, you think, to have a situation where the Palestinians' position is better than it is now? I mean, is that in fact a strategic priority or not?
Well, I think it should be, because peace in the Middle East is something we've been trying to achieve ever since World War II. I think, though, that looking at the reality we face, we have to begin thinking about whether the so-called two-state solution is viable anymore. If you want real economic opportunity for average Palestinians, maybe it's time to return to an older way of thinking, what used to be called pan-Arabism, and see if there's not some way to have Egypt take a larger role in the Gaza Strip and have Jordan take a larger role in the West Bank, rather than this endless discussion about a state that never seems to materialize. There are two viable states right there in the region, both at peace with Israel. I think that's something that should be explored more fully.
Egypt, Jordan.
In one go, Jordan has scrapped the Palestinian national legitimate aspirations, what the Americans have always called for, which is self-determination. In one go, all of a sudden, we have to be conquered by others. No, the Palestinian problem is very well known. This is a very simple situation of foreign military occupation that has lasted for 40 years, one of the longest. And ending this conflict is very simple too. It only takes the international community to have some serious will of ending Israel's occupation. We have international resolutions that govern, that we have the parameters, the guiding principles. And we were talking about the opportunity in Washington, the Annapolis conference, which I think is an opportunity, and the Americans are genuine. The administration is genuine about providing such an opportunity. But as the Palestinian president has said, we are not going there at any cost. We expect the least is the guiding principles on the main issues, the final status issues. We expect
like
a time...
Borders, Jerusalem, and
refugees, water, and bilateral relations. We expect a timetable. And by the way, I'm talking of experience, of bitter experience of 14 years in Oslo. We expect a very clear timetable of implementation, and we expect monitoring, international monitoring. And we expect to focus on peace, not the process. Therefore, we do not want to see a lasting peace process, as was the case in Oslo. We want to see a lasting peace. And the lasting peace can only happen if we have a very well-defined, concise process that does not last more than 6 months, maximum 1 year, and we know the parameters very well. By the way, we all know what the solution is. We all agree on the solution. The problem is how to get there. And how to get there is some serious political will in the part of the international community. The issue is no one has the courage or the ability or the willingness to pressurize Israel.
Well, what about Israel? You said earlier on, in fact, John, that it was a bad time for this conference because one of the reasons is that Israel is at its weakest, or one of its weakest moments at the moment, and therefore can't really do anything brave or daring because their situation wouldn't allow it. Do you think Israel will approach this conference in the way that we just heard?
Well, I don't think Israel itself is weak. I think they just demonstrated on September the 6th by apparently destroying a North Korean, Syrian nuclear power plant under construction. At least that's what some press stories indicate. So I think their military strength remains strong. I was referring to the weakness of the government situation, a weakness that is actually worse on the Palestinian side. Before we talk about substance here, let's ask the question, who represents the Palestinians? Is it Hamas? Is it Fatah? Who's going to carry out whatever commitments are made? I just think the situation is so fragmented, it's very unclear at this point whether the Palestinian Authority can ever be put together again.
Do you think that George Bush can really pull it out at this particular point and actually surprise people by his strength in going for it here? After all, most presidents in their second term try and solve the Middle East crisis as their part of their legacy to history. Do you think that George Bush is equipped to do that now?
Well, I think he's certainly going to try. I just don't see that the circumstances are propitious to him succeeding. And I think one reason goes back to something that former Secretary of State Jim Baker once said, which was about the Middle East: we can't want peace more than the parties themselves. And I think that may be the situation we're still in today.
What about the situation there? We're talking about more than two entities. Does it make sense to think of three entities here? I mean, Israel, and then the West Bank and Gaza as two separate, one by Fatah and one by Hamas. Does that make sense?
Absolutely not, whatsoever. The only, and by the way, one entity, two entities, three entities is not the issue. The issue, Israel is not accepting one entity, two entities, three entities. The real obstacle here is a decision in the Israeli part supported by the international community, to search for a just and lasting peace. And that can only be achieved, David, only can be achieved by redressing and addressing our serious, real issues, restoring our rights. And these rights, by the way, are very simple. We are not talking about threatening the state of Israel. We all know, as John just said, Israel is the fourth strongest army in the world. It's very well placed in the region, and therefore we Palestinians will never threaten it. Restoring our rights is going to be simple. I just have one main observation, and I'm happy that John with us here, because I'm hearing all this talk about the coming up conference. The observation is this: let us not, for the first time, once and for all, put the horse before the cart. Let us not talk about Palestinian leadership. We have Palestinian leaders. We have an elected president. He was elected by an overwhelming majority of Palestinians, John, 65%. That is Abu Mazen, and he is uncontested. Let us not talk about institution building of Palestinians. This is the horse before the cart. Let us not talk about security reform. Let us not talk about easing the economic situation. All these things are very important. But these things, David, are the product, not the precondition for political settlement. You get a political framework first, and then you start talking about institution building. We have built our institutions to the highest standards during Oslo, and in one go in 2002, all these institutions were absolutely demolished by the Israeli bulldozers.
Right. And at that point, we're virtually at the end of our time. But John, a last comment on what we just heard from you.
Well, I look at the fate of the average Palestinian. They want security, they want economic development. I think that's much more likely in established political institutions like the governments of Egypt and Jordan, looking at some kind of condominium or some kind of association. Let's be practical and see what we can achieve.
Thank you very much for joining us, John. Our thanks to you, John, and our thanks to Hassam here in the studio. Thank you both very much indeed. A very revealing conversation. He's been described as the greatest all-round cricketer in history. Some people may say second or third, but everyone says he's up there in the top three. But does Ian Botham think he was that good? Maybe he still is when he's playing out in the back garden. Find out all the news about that. That's Ian Botham, exclusive, after this.